I now call Deputy Stephen Donnelly. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Lascian Corda. I'd like to congratulate Deputy Michael McGrath for bringing this bill forward this evening. It's a very important piece of legislation and very timely. And I would like to acknowledge that the government is going to accept the bill tomorrow night. The Minister, with the greatest respect, I listened carefully to your speech in my office, and actually I still have no idea what the government is going to do. The government is going to accept the bill tomorrow night. As Deputy Doherty has just said, I don't know if it's going to come before committee shortly. It certainly doesn't feel like it's going to be in place before the sales process. And it is reflective, I think, of the government's position on this the whole time, which really has been quite extraordinary. The government's position has been, we won't legislate. We'll wait to see who buys the loans of these 13,000 families. We'll phone them up and we'll say to them, and I quote Minister Noonan, what's the story? The government says that it will legislate if necessary. Minister, of course it's necessary. These 13,000 families deserve equal protection under law. We don't say it's illegal to burgle these houses over here, but these 13,000 houses, it's not illegal to burgle them, but we'd really prefer it if nobody does. And if too many people burgle them, well, then we'll legislate. That's a completely unacceptable position. When in this country did we start treating people differently under the law? Surely we are moving to a better place than that. Now, this notion of a voluntary agreement, which you alluded to, Minister, is a nonsense. It's a complete nonsense. It isn't written down anywhere. There's no oversight by anybody. There's no oversight by the Minister. There's no oversight by the Financial Ombudsman. There's no oversight by the Central Bank. There's no oversight by the Department of Finance. There is no oversight. Nobody is going to come along and say, have you spent the €1 million needed for the IT system required to comply with the CCMA? Nobody's going to ask that question. Nobody's going to see the IT system. Nobody's going to come along to these American hedge funds and say, have you hired 40 compliance officers? Because the CCMA is a really complicated, unwieldy piece of compliance that actually offers very little protection for all of the work involved. Nobody is going to walk in to their office in Dallas or Chicago or wherever it is and say, I want to see the compliance officers, I want to see the IT systems, I want to see the paperwork, I want to see the audit trail. That's not going to happen. Now, the liquidator in committee last week said the following. He said, in his professional opinion, if the bidders, such as Lone Star and Oaktree and others, if they were asked to sign a binding agreement, they would reduce their bid price. Now let's just think about this for a second. The government says, and the liquidator says, they have full confidence. The liquidator said he would state his professional opinion on it, that these guys will comply. And at the same time, says in his professional opinion, if they are forced to comply, if they are asked to sign a binding agreement, they will lower their bid price. That means that they put a cash value on being able to walk away. That means they might walk away. That's what it means. That's logic. It is preposterous for the liquidator and the government to try and maintain those two positions at the same time. But of course, even if these families get some protection under legislation, and I hope they do, the other issue is they're not being allowed bid for their own mortgages. Now, I gave an example before of a family who are going to be evicted from their house. They're not going to be able to pay the arrears. They're not going to be able to do that. But based on the latest information I have, their mortgage is going to be sold for 30 cents in the euro, thereabouts. It's a €220,000 mortgage, and it's going to be sold by this government for about 60 grand to someone from America. And he or she is going to knock on their door and say, your house is in equity, get out. And if you don't get out, We will not only follow you up for the residual money, we will put another 10 grand of legal fees on top because you're forcing us to hire lawyers to evict you. That's what this government is doing. And Minister, I have tried. I've brought this up in leaders' questions repeatedly. We've had 4 hours with the liquidator. I have tried to understand the government's position. I have said to the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach, a process can be designed that returns this state the same amount of money and lets these families bid on their mortgages.
Thank you, Deputy.
Will you pause the process and let that process be designed? Will you pause the sale? And the answer I get from this government is no. And I'll finish on this last count, Corla. Why? For weeks and weeks and weeks, I have been asking myself, and I'm sure the families have been asking themselves, why, if we can help 13,000 families and return the same amount of money to the Dáil, or to the state, will we not do that? And it only occurred to me in the last few days. You don't want to do it. You don't want these families to bid on their own mortgages. You don't want an inconvenient headline from some begrudger that says, this family got a 50% write-down on their mortgage and they're staying in the house, because then a bunch of other people around the country will say, well, what about me? There is a total and pathetic and damaging lack of political leadership. You don't
Deputy,
actually want them
just ask
to
you
do it.
Move that the debate be adjourned, please.
I will. If I just finish, I'd like to commend Deputy McGrath again for bringing this in and say that the government's position is appalling, and that they are feeding 13,000 families to the wolves.
Thank you, Deputy.
And move the adjournment.
Tá Dáil Ratlogaí Lahore Trishini Majin Morach. The Dáil stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. Come on, give.